For decades, Washington has sold the world an image of unmatched strength, the indispensable nation, the leader of the free world. But when you strip away the slogans and look at the data, a very different picture emerges. A 2025 global survey of 60 major economies reveals something staggering. The United States, a country that endlessly advertises its leadership, now ranks 48th out of 60 in global reputation. Not 14th. A collapse from 30th place in 2024, already extremely low. Because even before Donald Trump returned to power, under Joe Biden, the U.S. reputation was already in freefall. And when you analyze Washington's behavior over the last century, constant wars, endless covert coups, illegal sanctions, the world's rejection of U.S. leadership becomes not just predictable, but inevitable. And the most symbolic proof of American isolation came on October 29, 2025, at the United Nations General Assembly, where nearly the entire planet, 85% of countries representing over 90% of humanity, demanded an end to Washington's six-decade illegal blockade on Cuba. Only 7 countries supported the U.S. position. This is the story of a superpower that still talks like an empire but stands increasingly alone. The United States loves projecting the idea that it sits at the center of the world, a global leader, a moral authority, a nation others supposedly admire and aspire to emulate. This narrative is repeated constantly across American media, politics, and academia. But outside of its own borders, the world sees something very different. A country isolated from global opinion, distrusted by the international community, and increasingly viewed as a destabilizing force rather than a source of leadership. Respondents were asked to identify which countries they believed had the strongest global reputations. The results were devastating for Washington. In 2024, the United States had already fallen to a shockingly low 30th place in the lower half of the world's largest economies. But by 2025, the U.S. plummeted even further, landing at 48th out of 60, placing it among the worst-rated nations on the list. And while Donald Trump's return to power certainly accelerated this collapse, it's critical to note, the U.S. was deeply unpopular even under Biden. The structural problem runs much deeper than a single administration. This is a crisis of empire. Washington's reputation declines for one obvious reason. The United States has been in a near-permanent state of war for nearly all of its modern history. According to publicly available U.S. government data, the U.S. military has intervened in a majority of the world's countries, through invasions, bombings, sanctions, and covert operations. Decades of regime change wars have left entire regions destabilized. Nothing demonstrates this isolation more clearly than the annual United Nations vote condemning the U.S. embargo on Cuba, an embargo that has lasted for more than 60 years. On October 29, 2025, the UN General Assembly held its latest vote demanding an end to the illegal blockade. Out of 193 UN member states, 165 supported the resolution. That's 85% of all countries, representing well over 90% of the world's population. Only 7 countries voted against ending the blockade: the United States itself and 6 of its political dependents: Israel, Argentina, Paraguay, North Macedonia, Hungary, and Ukraine. This micro-bloc of 7 nations makes up just 3.6% of UN membership. Symbolically, the image is striking: the overwhelming majority of humanity on one side, and Washington with a tiny cluster of client states on the other. If this were truly a global consensus about freedom and democracy, the United States would not be standing virtually alone. Take Hungary, led by Viktor Orban, glorified in Western conservative media as an icon of nationalist independence. Yet every time Washington pressures him to support its agenda, he complies. Under Orban's leadership, Hungary has repeatedly voted alongside Washington and Israel, even on issues such as ceasefires in Gaza and Palestinian statehood. Another example, Argentina, now governed by Javier Milei, a self-declared anarcho-capitalist who openly identifies as a U.S. loyalist. His government has been flooded with $82 billion in loans and aid from the U.S., the IMF, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank, all institutions under Washington's dominant control. In exchange, Argentina consistently votes in alignment with U.S. foreign policy interests, including supporting the illegal blockade on Cuba. Meanwhile, Ukraine, a country that claims to defend international law, once again sided with Washington. And Israel, against the overwhelming majority of the international community seeking to uphold international law. Ukraine's vote shows clearly that its foreign policy decisions are not independent. They reflect Washington's geopolitical agenda. Washington worked aggressively behind the scenes to secure these votes, even distributing intelligence linking Cuba to Russia's conflict with Ukraine, part of a broader strategy of political coercion. And yet, despite this massive diplomatic and economic pressure campaign, Washington mustered support from only 6 other countries. Reuters titled its report, U.S. fails to make big dent in UN vote calling for end to Cuba embargo. That headline says it all. While the U.S. did convince 12 countries to abstain, this still represents just 6.2% of UN member states. These abstentions came mostly from Eastern European and Central European states, countries that cited Cuba's alliance with Russia as the reason for not voting in favor of condemning the embargo. States like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, Romania, and Albania claimed that abstaining was an act of protest against Cuba's pro-Russian positions. Some went further, falsely accusing Cuba of sending troops to assist Russia, a claim the Cuban government has categorically denied. While there are certainly Cuban volunteers fighting alongside Russian forces, none were deployed by the Cuban state. These are individuals who, after living under Washington's brutal economic war for their entire lives, chose to confront the U.S. militarily in Ukraine, a fact widely documented but intentionally distorted by Western governments. But even here, the abstentions do not reflect genuine political independence. In earlier years to 2022, 2023, and 2024, these same countries voted for the resolution calling for an end to the embargo. Their sudden shift in 2025 directly coincides with the Trump administration's intense diplomatic pressure. Equally revealing are the other abstaining governments. Ecuador, under Daniel Noboa, a dual U.S. citizen and oligarch aligned completely with Washington. Noboa has opened the door to new U.S. military facilities in Ecuador and has repeatedly backed U.S. regional security agendas. Costa Rica similarly follows Washington's directives nearly without question. In total, Trump's team achieved only minimal gains. Their massive lobbying campaign resulted in a mere 5-country increase in no votes from 2 to 7, far from demonstrating American influence. This highlights the dramatic erosion of U.S. soft power. A core architect of this failed campaign is Marco Rubio, arguably the second most powerful figure in the Trump administration. Serving simultaneously as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Rubio holds unprecedented control over U.S. foreign policy and national security. A lifelong Cuba hardliner, Rubio has built an entire political career on the promise of destabilizing and overthrowing Cuba's socialist government. Rubio's political mythology, that his family fled communist oppression, is a fabrication. Public records confirm his parents left Cuba in 1956, 3 years before the revolution, at a time when Cuba was ruled by U.S. dictator Fulgencio Batista. This anti-Cuba obsession is not new. The U.S. blockade was conceived in the early 1960s as an explicit strategy to break the Cuban Revolution by inflicting widespread pain on ordinary civilians. A 1960 U.S. State Department memorandum, still published on the official office of the historian website, states without ambiguity, the only foreseeable means of alienating internal support is through disenchantment and disaffection based on economic dissatisfaction and hardship. Every possible means should be undertaken promptly to weaken the economic life of Cuba, to bring about hunger, desperation, and the overthrow of the government. This remains the blueprint for U.S. policy today. Weaponized hunger as a tool of regime change. Contrary to Washington's propaganda, the blockade is not simply a matter of banning U.S. trade with Cuba. The U.S. controls the global financial system, the dollar, the SWIFT network, international banking compliance, maritime insurance, and key shipping infrastructure. Secondary sanctions prevent foreign banks, insurers, and corporations from engaging with Cuba. Even humanitarian shipments face enormous obstacles due to U.S. penalties, and despite the catastrophic impact, Trump has tightened these sanctions further. In his first weeks back in office, Marco Rubio announced the restoration of a tough Cuba policy, while also re-adding Cuba to Washington's fraudulent list of state sponsors of terrorism, a list so politically manipulated that Nelson Mandela remained on it until 2008. Declassified documents reveal the CIA attempted to assassinate Fidel Castro at least 638 times, more than any leader in documented history. Washington's imperial violence extends beyond Cuba. Today, Trump's administration is escalating a terror-style war against Venezuela. The Associated Press revealed that U.S. agents attempted to bribe and blackmail the pilot of President Nicolas Maduro's aircraft, offering him $50 million to deliver Maduro into U.S. custody. When he refused, they threatened his children by name. Reuters further exposed that U.S. military personnel involved in secret operations in Latin America were forced to sign new NDAs, fueling fears of a planned U.S. invasion. Even the Wall Street Journal admitted Washington is reviving the 200-year-old Monroe Doctrine, rebranded inside Trump's circle as the Monroe Doctrine, a blatant declaration of U.S. neocolonial authority over Latin America. This is what global audiences see. This is why Washington stands alone at the UN. The story of 2025 is not simply that the world rejected the US embargo on Cuba. It's that the world rejected the myth of American leadership. A superpower isolated. Where Washington once dictated global politics, it now finds itself surrounded by a world increasingly unwilling to obey. And the numbers don't lie.